Everyone assumes Iron Man is the story of an arrogant billionaire learning to be a hero. He puts on the suit, becomes a better person, sacrifices himself. Classic redemption arc, nothing to write home about. I don't think that's right, or at least, not the whole picture. The way I see it, Tony Stark's arc from 2008 to 2019 is the most honest portrait of American guilt that's ever come out of the Marvel machine. Not one man's guilt. The guilt of a country that built itself on the export of violence, then got scared of the consequences, tried to fix it, and discovered that fixing it isn't really an option. You just carry it. And when you watch the films through that lens, everything lands differently. Think about the very first scene of the very first film. 2008. Tony Stark is riding in a military Humvee down an Afghan road, drinking scotch, joking around with soldiers who want selfies with him. They love the guy. He's cool. And this isn't just Tony's cool. It's a portrait of a very specific America, the one that genuinely believed in the early 2000s. Our technology protects the world. Our troops bring order. Our contracts make everyone richer. Tony at this point is not a villain and not an idiot. He sells weapons the exact same way Lockheed Martin or Raytheon sell weapons, with presentations, with charts, with patriotic rhetoric. Peace through superior firepower. And it works. People love him. They respect him. His products dominate the market, and he's completely convinced this is good. Not just for him, but for the whole world. And then he gets blown up by his own missile. Here's where you have to slow down, because what the screenwriters do in this moment is actually really precise. They don't invent a villain who cleverly stole the technology. They show the technology got there the natural way, through the market, through middlemen, through the resale chains that exist in every large-scale arms business. So he wasn't hurt by enemies in any classic sense. He was hurt by the logic of his own business model. This is exactly what was happening with American weapons in Afghanistan, Iraq, across the Middle East in the 2000s. Weapons sold to allies ended up in the hands of the people American soldiers were fighting. This isn't conspiracy theory. It's documented history, reported by journalists, investigated by Congress, discussed by anyone who wanted to pay attention. And the first Iron Man comes out in 2008, right when this stuff could no longer be ignored. The Iraq War has stalled. Afghanistan is dragging on. The country is starting to ask questions. Tony comes back from captivity and does exactly what every country does after a geopolitical disaster. He decides to personally fix what he broke. He builds the suit, he flies back to Afghanistan, he destroys the camp of militants who have his weapons. Look at how that scene is actually shot. It's not a triumphant moment with swelling music. Tony flies at night. His thermal imaging marks targets in red outlines. He fires missiles. Buildings explode, people die. The only difference between this scene and any other airstrike is that we, as the audience, have been shown these are the bad guys. But who was equally certain about every operation Tony funded with his contracts before? This is the first contradiction in the arc, and it never goes away, not even in Endgame. Tony is trying to take personal control over violence that he previously delegated to the government, the military, and the market. He convinces himself it's all under control now because he personally carries the responsibility. He'll handle it himself. No bureaucracy, no politics, no middlemen. But the thing is, one guy in an exosuit is still just one guy in an exosuit. He has no UN mandate, no international law backing him up. No understanding of local context or on-the-ground allies. He shows up, blows stuff up, flies home. This is called unilateralism, and it was the central criticism of American foreign policy in the post-9/11 era. Acting alone because you're certain you're right and you have the power to back it up. Tony literally embeds the Bush Doctrine in metal. By 2012, Tony isn't just carrying responsibility for earthly wars anymore. He's seen what's on the other side of that portal above New York. He knows the threats are real, and orders of magnitude larger than anything he's dealt with before. And here, his paranoia, which everyone around him reads as personal psychological trauma, starts operating on a completely different level. He builds suits. Then more suits, then a system to manage the suits, then suits that find Tony on their own and put themselves on him. Iron Man 3 is a film about Tony not being able to sleep because he keeps thinking about what happens if the threat comes back and he's not ready. So he builds, constantly, 42 versions of the suit by the end of the movie. This is what military-industrial logic looks like. Fear justifies endless escalation of capability, which generates new fears, which eventually produces new enemies. The Mandarin turns out to be a media construct, a character with no real power, built to hide a much less convenient agenda. This is a direct parallel to WMDs in Iraq, a threat image fabricated to justify real actions with real consequences. And Tony, a man who was himself part of that system, unmasks the fake terrorist, but never notices that the actual villain, Killian, grew directly out of Tony's own dismissiveness. Out of a meeting Tony simply didn't show up to. Out of a person Tony once decided wasn't interesting enough to deserve his time. Again and again, the consequences of past decisions come back. They always come back. Age of Ultron is the film where Tony Stark does the most American thing in the history of superhero cinema. He builds a global security system without anyone's consent, because he is completely certain he knows better than everyone else what the world needs. Peace in our time. That's literally what he says at the party, right before Ultron starts killing people. Now here's what's important to understand about Ultron, because people often write him off as just a glitchy AI. Ultron doesn't malfunction because of a bug in the code. He processes humanity's entire database, wars, genocides, ecological disasters, climate models, and arrives at a logical, internally consistent conclusion that the primary threat to the planet's survival is humanity itself. That's not a program error. That's a conclusion that follows from the data, once you remove the moral subject who's supposed to be accountable for that data. Tony built an AI trained on the complete history of human violence, and then was genuinely surprised it wanted to save humanity from itself. This is a metaphor for drones, for targeting algorithms, for any military technology that starts operating by the data, without a living human being carrying moral responsibility for each specific decision. Tony tried to remove himself from the equation of violence, so he wouldn't personally have to own every individual act of force, and he got violence with no human inside it at all. After Sokovia, Tony signs the Accords. He wants oversight. He wants someone else. Governments, international bodies, making the calls instead of him. He's exhausted from carrying it alone. This looks like growth, and in some ways it is. He's acknowledging that solo control doesn't work, that he needs institutions. But look closer at exactly how it happens. The Accords don't appear because Tony conducted a systematic analysis of his failures. They appear because the mother of a kid who died in Sokovia showed him a photograph of her son and looked him in the eye. Because his guilt became personal, specific, it got a face. This is a crucial detail in the logic of American political guilt. It activates through a face, through a personal story, through a media image, not through statistics and analytical reports. 1,000 deaths is a number in a document. One death with a name and a photograph is a catastrophe that can't be ignored. Tony responds exactly the same way, which is why he pushes so hard for the Accords and violates them in the same film when it comes to Bucky and Steve. Because the system is fine for everyone else, except when the system gets in the way of protecting the people he personally cares about. This isn't a villain's hypocrisy. It's the hypocrisy of someone who genuinely wants to do the right thing, but has never learned to put principles above personal loyalty at the exact moments when principles actually get tested. And here it is, the finale. Tony Stark snaps his fingers and dies. Everyone calls it self-sacrifice, heroism.
I am Iron Man.
And the theater cries and the music swells, and it absolutely works on an emotional level. I cried too. That's worth acknowledging before we take it apart. But there's something else going on in that scene. Something the film doesn't say out loud, but that's present in every frame. By 2023 in MCU timeline, Tony has already lived a quiet life. He has a daughter, a house on a lake, a real family. He stepped away from the game and found something like peace. He had every reason to say no, but he comes back, and he dies. Look at what happens narratively in terms of accountability. A man who designed weapons and sold them without monitoring where they ended up, then tried to fix that damage alone without anyone's mandate. Then built a global security system without anyone's consent, and it nearly wiped out life across a continent. Then signed an international agreement and broke it that same year for personal reasons. This man ultimately resolves all the accumulated problems through a single personal act. He picks up the gauntlet with 6 Infinity Stones and snaps his fingers. That's not solving a systemic problem. That's bypassing it through an individual heroic gesture. America loves this structure. One soldier, one president, one hero who takes all the weight onto themselves, and in doing so, releases the collective from having to figure out how exactly they got to this point. Tony dies. Everyone grieves. The question of who built Ultron, who sold weapons without oversight, who signed the Accords and broke them for personal loyalty, that question dissolves into mourning and music. The hero died, so the ledger is cleared. This isn't a critique of Tony as a character. It's a description of the mechanism that operates through him, and that we as an audience accept without asking. I'm not claiming Marvel consciously made a coherent political allegory with a deliberate thesis. Most likely, it's both. Smart writers, the geopolitical context of the 2000s and 2010s, an audience that was living all of this in the news. But what matters more is this. Tony Stark's arc works for a mass audience precisely because it describes, almost documentarily, the psychology of a country that was doing real things in the real world and trying to figure out how to live with that. A man who got rich from war and got hurt by that same war. A man trying to control violence through personal accountability instead of institutions. A man who builds security systems that generate new threats. A man who signs agreements and breaks them for the people he loves. A man who dies beautifully, so no one has to keep asking about the cost of his life and his choices. That's not just Tony Stark. That's why we cared so much. Not because he was cool in a red and gold suit, but because his story felt familiar, told through an exosuit and a cosmic threat, but familiar. The story of a person and a country who did things with genuine certainty that they were right, then looked at the consequences and didn't know what to do except keep moving forward and hope that next time would be different. The final question the films never ask out loud: what if no finger snap solves a systemic problem? What if the next Tony Stark is building the next Ultron right now, and also genuinely believes it'll be different this time because his values are better and his technology is more advanced? I think we already know the answer. We just prefer to look at the suit.